Imagine living your life after 50 and feeling energized and excited about your future. Welcome to the Women in the Middle podcast, the podcast for women who are ready to figure out what they want and create the life they deserve. Here's your host and master certified life coach, Susie Rosenstein.
Hey there, today we're talking about living on autopilot and what I see differently now. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast Women in the Middle with over 2 million downloads and counting. I'm so grateful that the podcast world has brought us together. It's like a miracle sometimes when that happens. When I think about it, I'm like, wow, we're connected and we're connecting right now. Thank you so much for being here. Women in the Middle is all about getting unstuck, clear, and excited about leading your next chapter, especially if you're in your 50s and 60s and starting to feel time differently now. I'm your host, Susie Rosenstein, your master certified coach, life leadership mentor, and certified Zentangle teacher, and I'm so happy to be here. Now, my guess is that if you're listening now, you're probably not having a full-blown midlife crisis, however you define it, if you even think it's a thing. I use that word because it's like a term that a lot of people relate to, but I don't really think of it as a crisis. But the thing is that you are capable, you're responsible, you're thoughtful, and highly productive. But something might feel slightly off. You know, like parts of your life or your whole life, they feel unintentional. Time feels different now. Not necessarily a whole dramatic thing, but it is noticeable. And that's what we're talking about today. But first, just quick, I wanted to tell you about a new call that I'm offering. It's called the Next Chapter Reset, and it includes the complete autopilot audit. It's perfect for you if you've noticed that you're starting to feel time differently. You got the memo, time is flying by. You probably say it all the time like I do. But even though you're capable, responsible, and productive, your days may be starting to feel unintentional. Not all the things, but some of the things. So the Next Chapter Reset will help you get clear insight into what's actually happening, a sharper understanding of what you want going forward, and a grounded recommendation for your next step. It's like a structured mirror on your life, or what's really going on and why it seems off. I am super committed to this because time really does matter now more than ever. And my friend, sleepwalking through the privilege of aging, it's just not your style. So if you're ready to identify where you may be running on default instead of decision, book your Next Chapter Reset in my shop. Just go to www.susierosenstein.com and click on the shop tab and you'll find the Next Chapter Reset there. Okay, let's dive in. Now, last week in episode 499, I shared something more personal, how my art journal became a kind of sneak attack on autopilot in small everyday moments. That episode was about noticing. Today, I want to zoom out a bit. We're going to take a look at what happens when autopilot isn't just about rushing through a page in a journal, but instead quietly coasting through a season of your life. So a few years ago, way back in episode 241, which must have been in 2021 or so, somewhere around then, I talked about living on autopilot in midlife. At that time, I shared a helpful tool I call the benchmark check-in. It was about using your age and stage to plan more intentionally so you don't wake up with regrets. And of course, I'll post this link in the show notes if you're interested. I still love that tool. Planning matters, but today, I see autopilot a little differently. At that time, I was in my late 50s, and now I'm in my early 60s. Back then, I was focused on planning. Today, I'm focused on interruption. Now, doesn't that sound like a little more fun? The reason for this is because planning doesn't really matter that much if you're still coasting through life and winging it. And I think so many of us are. Here's the thing, being on autopilot in your life is often really subtle. You may not even notice it or even notice how pervasive it is. It typically doesn't look like anything extreme like falling apart or big-time overwhelm. Instead, it often looks like, overall being stable, but feeling slightly off or unsettled. Or thinking about retirement, but in a vague way, not defining it for yourself. It could be having ideas, but not scheduling anything, not even on your vision board. Maybe it's over functioning for everyone else, and not putting yourself first. Or this common phenomenon, letting another year or more pass without checking in with your priorities and how they may have changed. What I'm getting at is autopilot isn't about laziness. You're doing the things. Autopilot is a habit. And habit feels efficient, doesn't it? And I know how much you love to be efficient. Me too. But like I was saying, this is all well and good on paper until 5 or 10 years go by in a blink. So I realized one of my own personal examples of coasting just this year. It was about my bucket list, or lack thereof, that is. I was creating a workshop about how to create a bucket list that was really juicy, like broad, not just about travel plans, and way more comprehensive than you might imagine. And that's when I realized that my own bucket list was pretty weak and empty and pathetic. I was coasting. I hadn't even prioritized it at all, but I really wanted it in my life. I'm surrounded by people talking about bucket list. I coach on it. Even my kids who are 27 to 30 years old, they talk about it, and mine wasn't thought through at all. This is just one small example, but I think it makes the point. Now, there's one more brief example I want to mention. I feel like I have to mention it. It's the fact that I'm rocking my CPAP machine since I turned 60. I didn't want anything to do with it. I was in complete denial about snoring and getting a sleep study in my 50s. When my husband would bring it up, out of autopilot habit, I would just shut it down. But that all changed when I turned 60. No more coasting about my health. So here's the part where I'm going to be super direct. They don't call me Bottom Line Rosenstein for nothing. But seriously, we are closer to the end than the beginning. And when you really think about it, it's just math. This stage of your life is connected to the end of your life. And yes, that means dying. Unless you're planning to live to 120, chances are that you're closer to the end than the beginning. Now, here's the part that might surprise you. I think there's a huge benefit to this awareness. This awareness is actually a gift. And that's something I really understand personally. You may have heard me share this before. I have outlived both of my parents. I also watched my 4 grandparents grieve the loss of their adult children who died far too soon. I've seen what it looks like when a life ends before anyone expects it to. And with my parents, my mother was only 32 and my father 41 when they passed. So I was 5 when my mother died and 12 when my father died. And somewhere along the line, that shifted something in me. Aging stopped feeling like something to resist. It started feeling like a privilege. Not everyone gets to turn 50. Not everyone gets to turn 62, like my birthday last year, or whatever age you are right now. Not everyone gets to complain about their knees or joke about how many pairs of reading glasses they have either. Time is not guaranteed. So when I say that this awareness is a gift, I mean it. When you've seen time end too soon, you stop treating it casually. And I don't want you treating yours casually either. That doesn't mean panic, but it does mean intention. It means being intentional, because I really believe there's a huge cost to coasting. I know what you're thinking. Coasting feels safe. Well, you're right. It can feel safe, but it quietly costs you years. Here's what I mean. If you're coasting, you're basically running on default. Running on default looks like, inheriting other people's retirement ideas instead of designing and thinking about your own. Saying you want more freedom, but never changing your calendar. Or maybe waiting until you feel more ready, whatever that is. Or telling yourself you'll figure it out later, you'll do it later, without anything specific, that kind of thing. Later is autopilot's favorite word. Leadership interrupts default living like this. So I want to share 2 quick examples about how I'm leading my life more now that I'm in my 60s. The first epiphany that I did something about was to verbalize my desire to go whale watching at least once a year. Now, you might think that's no big deal, but I am not on the ocean. I am nowhere close to whales. So this was a big shift to me because I was winging it before. Like if it was easy, if I was going for a conference, if I was near whales, I would make an effort, but it wasn't like stating my desire. Now I've articulated the desire and it's top of mind. It becomes something that drives other decisions. For example, the itinerary, the agenda for my recent retreat in Costa Rica. My love of wildlife and creativity were the main drivers of what I wanted to bring to my guests, and whale watching was a main event, and it did not disappoint. Another example is how I'm developing my bucket list. The first thing was to decide that even though it's not my favorite way to refer to a list of things I'm excited to do or experience in my lifetime, I'm embracing the term bucket list because it's easy to understand and talk about. The second thing was to raise my awareness of my thinking that shuts down my desire. I've noticed I often think things like, ooh, that's too expensive, or that's too hard, I could never do that. Or it's too remote, I couldn't even get there, it'd be way too expensive. And when I get ideas, that kind of stuff happens right away, those thoughts. And that kind of thinking squishes dreams in no time flat. They don't even have a chance to see the light of day. So now it's way easier for me to catch myself in the act of thinking thoughts like these about desires. And when I'm able to notice the desire, I allow it to be a thing that I want to explore, even if I don't yet know how or when it might happen. So I have primed myself to notice desires related to something that might want to be on a bucket list. The most recent example of this was regarding experiencing the monarch butterfly migration in Mexico. I've been fascinated by this for a long time, but I never thought I need to go and see that. I just thought, wow, that happened someplace far away. It must be hard. And I told you all those thoughts, I think, and they all came up. But this time I saw something. I was at a museum exhibit and I saw a photograph of it and I started my shenanigans, but I caught myself in mid-thought. And I'm like, wait a minute. I can add that to my bucket list. I want to see that. I claimed it. I claimed the desire. Someday I'm going to do that. So these are two examples that I was coasting about, and now I'm much more intentional in my 60s, and I'm much more intentional about catching desires and being intentional. Because if you're not intentional, it just is likely not to happen, or it's not going to happen in the way that you want it. Okay, now let's talk about the 5-year question. Let me ask you something. If nothing changed in the next 5 years, what would concern you? What would no longer be okay? Really let that land. What would quietly disappoint you? Most women wait until that concern becomes urgent or something you would think of as a really big deal. You don't have to. The way you answered that question is so important. I remember I used to think about turning 50, and I didn't realize what I was associating it with. But on the lead up to 50, for a long time, not like a couple of months, but for years, maybe even a decade or more than one decade, I used to think by the time I'm 50, I will have gone back to my pre-baby weight. My baby is they're in their late 20s, early 30s now. But I thought, the way I thought about turning 50 was associated with that. And it's so interesting how we wait and then how time passes by so quickly. So I really want you to recognize how you answered that question. Maybe you didn't articulate it in words, maybe you didn't write it down, but something popped into your mind. Maybe it was a whisper, a hint, an image, whatever it was, really notice that. Because whatever it was is clarity trying to get your attention. It's clarity knocking on the door. Think of it that way. So the next question is, are you ready to open the door? Life leadership in midlife isn't about doing more. It doesn't have to be that. It's more about deciding more deliberately. And it begins with your thinking. First, you have to find your thoughts. Then you need to understand what you want. And then you need to nurture your commitment to yourself. This is my FUN framework, F.U.N. framework, FUN framework. F stands for find your thoughts. U stands for understand what you want, and N stands for nurture your commitment to yourself. And this is one of my core teachings. When you think on purpose, you stop reacting to your life. You start leading it. And this is what I mean by being the queen of your brain domain. You probably have heard me say this. I say it on the outro of all my podcast episodes. Not a drama queen. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a decisive life leadership queen. When you open the door to clarity, you're ready to be the queen of your brain domain. Now, I think you heard my not so quiet hints. Most women, and I bet this is you too, you don't need more information. Instead, what's important is a structured interruption. The autopilot audit is that interruption. So, my friend, if this episode resonated with you, if something in you thought, yes, you know what? I have been coasting a little, then please don't ignore that. You're in the best company. I promise you, this is such a common midlife woman thing. You're in the best company. The autopilot audit is for women who feel time differently now and don't want to keep postponing themselves. It's 50 minutes, it's private with me, it's on Zoom, and it's structured. We walk through 5 dimensions of your life: your time, your retirement design, your contribution, your relationships, your energy. You leave with clarity, and I give you my honest recommendation. No pressure, but it is precision. This is structured because time is a gift. We are talking about something really important. Time is a gift. And life leadership begins with one honest conversation. So if you've been thinking about making a change for a while, this is your first step, and I'd love to talk to you. Okay, so that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening to the Women in the Middle show. Please remember to share it with your friends and other midlife gals you know would get a lot out of it. I have to mention, sometimes somebody doesn't even listen to a podcast yet. You may have friends like this, and if that's the case, please show them how to find the podcasts on their phone. They may not even know that there's an app there. All right, now being the queen of your brain domain is the best way to be. You've heard me say this before. It is time to stop waiting for the right moment and start creating the happiness, excitement, joy, and fulfillment that you crave. Also, as I mentioned earlier, if you know that sleepwalking through the privilege of aging isn't your style, I think you're ready to identify where you may be running on default instead of decision. How great is that? Go ahead and book your next chapter reset, which includes the complete autopilot audit in my shop. Just go to www.susierosenstein.com and click on that shop tab, and you'll find it right there. For show notes and links, go to www.susierosenstein.com and click on the podcast tab and look for episode 450. And you'll also see a link there for my other show, The Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs, which is all about the reality of running your business when you're a midlife gal. It's also on iTunes, Spotify, and all the podcast places. Let's do this, ladies. It's time for you to put yourself first, one thought at a time. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.